Verses 4 and 5. Heat is overcome by the cool light of the moon. Want by the wish-fulfilling tree, and sin by the holy river Ganges. Those three, heat, want, and sin, flee at the august sight of the peerless sage. Holy rivers, which are only water, an idol of gods, which are made of stones and metals, are not as mighty as the sages are. For while they make one pure in the course of a long time, the sage's eyes, by a mere glance, purify at once. I again quote Sri Bhagavan, who once said, "One day I was going out from Skanda ashram. That day Chalama had some bit of a newspaper in her hand and was learning by heart a song from the Yoga Vasista in praise of the benefits of satsanga. By the association with holy men, the imperfect will become perfect. Danger, good luck, and the inauspicious, auspicious. For those who have bathed in the Ganges of fellowship with such realized souls, penance, almsgiving, bathing in sacred rivers are all unnecessary. Seek therefore by all means the company of the wise, which is a boat to carry one across the ocean of birth and death." A devotee asked the Maharshi, "My profession requires that I cannot remain in the vicinity of sages and saints. Can I have realization even in the absence of satsang?" Sri Bhagavan assured him, "Sat is eham pratyaya saram," which means the self of self. The saint is that self of self. He is immanent in all. Can anyone remain without the self? No. So no one is away from satsang. He also said, "The man is always the self, and yet he does not know it. He confounds it with the non-self, the body and the mind and such things. And this confusion is due to ignorance. If the ignorance be wiped out, the confusion will cease to exist, and the true knowledge will be unfolded. By remaining in contact with realized sages, the man gradually loses the ignorance until its removal is complete. The eternal self is thus revealed." Satsanga means sangha, association with sat. Sat is only the self, reality. Since the self is not now understood to be sat, the company of the sage who has thus understood is sat. That is satsanga. Introversion results. Then sat is revealed. Just as even the strongest man, like Hercules, cannot lift the stool on which he is seated, we can never transcend the illusion, maya, cast on us by our own mind, and get re-established in the reality which is our true state of being. It is true that God created every being equal in all respects. Yet, if one mistakes oneself to be a separate individual, a jiva, away and apart from the single, solid reality, which every one of us truly is, one has to seek a source which will help us release ourselves from the illusion of separateness. While one's mind can readily accept the concept of superior beings like God and messiahs, incarnations and avatars, it refuses to accept that it itself is the very same superior being. One needs enormous help to lift oneself up, to realize that one is ever the reality only. Sages and saints who have already trodden the path and transcended the limitations are the milestones, the lighthouses on the path of the aspirant's journey within. Therefore, seeking the sages and saints, being in their presence, and imbibing their spiritual instructions is the safest, surest, and quickest way. Truth is ever there, here, shining powerfully. And the spiritual aspirant is ever here, ignorant of the ever-existing truth. Bhagavan Ramana refers to truth as the higher power. The higher power is the common property of all. No exceptions, no partiality. Yet the ignorant aspirant feels the duality of there and here and does not realize that they are the same. This is the ignorance that should go, that should get wiped out. The Maharshi pointedly referred to this ignorance as the fault of identifying oneself with one's body and mind, and by thereby ignoring the truth that one is ever the higher power. He guided the aspirants to shift one's attention from non-truth to the truth. The act of shifting one's attention from non-real body and mind to the ever-existent reality of one's own pure being is generally termed as spiritual sadhana. One needs guidance to do spiritual sadhana. The Buddhist analogy, the finger pointing to the moon, is a good example. Likewise, the sage, the saint, does not create the reality, but only removes one's ignorance so that one can locate and see the reality. Unlike in the analogy where the wayfarer enables one to see the moon outside of oneself, the sage enables one to recognize the reality within oneself as one's own ever-existent truth. Hence, the Maharshi emphasized, seek the company of sages. Having defined the true significance and the importance of spiritual sadhana and satsang, I feel it would be helpful if I shared with you as to how I was guided throughout my spiritual life. Sri Bhagavan said, the efforts made by the aspirant and the pouring in of the Guru's grace on him are synonymous and simultaneous. They are not two different things, but one and the same process of spiritual fulfillment. The importance of this sharing is to focus attention on and emphasize how the higher power guides a seeker. Please merge with the content of the spiritual stories. It will help you in your own spiritual sadhana. I had the good fortune of being brought up in Sri Ramanasramam by the old devotees of Sri Bhagavan who knew Sri Bhagavan as God. Until I was 14, I only saw Sri Bhagavan as my grand uncle and an extraordinarily compassionate old man. I obtained a degree in economics in 1956. For the next 2 years, up until 1958, I made a fervent effort to get a job and help support my father financially. To begin with, I stayed at the ashram and started helping my father with the ashram work. Then, neither did I have any inclination towards spiritual life, nor to stay on in the ashram on a permanent basis. But all my efforts to get employed outside failed. At that time, the professor of philosophy at the University of Madras, Dr. T.M.P. Mahadevan, used to often visit the ashram. I was drawn to him, his erudition, and his calm nature. And in 1958, he guided me to join the university for a master's course in philosophy, as it was also the same year that Sri Bhagavan's unique teaching of self-inquiry was being included in the syllabus. For the next 2 years, I studied in the University of Madras and obtained a master's degree in philosophy. I thus learned both Eastern and Western philosophy as academic subjects. While Dr. T.M.P. Mahadevan and other 3 professors taught Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy was taught exclusively by a genius, Dr. C.T.K. Chari. His elucidations on Berkeley, Hegel, Immanuel Kant, and Henri Bergson captivated my heart. When I once expressed to Dr. Chari my wonder and elation in listening to his exposition on the philosophy of Henri Bergson, he said, "Though other philosophers did not agree with his theory on élan vital, which is vital impetus, Henri Bergson is the Western philosopher besides Spinoza who came very close to the Vedanta philosophy of the Hindus. All the Western philosophies, in spite of their brilliant analysis, could at the most arrive only at karmam jadam, that is, that actions are insentient. For Bhagavan Ramana, it is the beginning of his exposition on truth. The very first verse in his 30 verses of instruction commences with this statement. Then he goes on building up his conclusion that one's own being is the final truth. How true it is! Western philosophies could not progress further as their dependence is totally based on the brain's understanding and never based on intuitive, direct experience. Bhagavan Ramana, however, gives an acceptable blend between logical conclusions and intuitive confirmations through his practical method of the who am I self-inquiry. Through self-inquiry, each one can directly experience the truth in oneself. On the completion of my master's in philosophy, Dr. Mahadevan advised me to take up the 3-year PhD course. He said that I could bring out a systematic research paper on the greatness and necessity of Bhagavan Ramana's self-inquiry and get a doctorate in philosophy. Another professor suggested that I bring out a paper synthesizing Bhagavan Ramana's self-inquiry with the essence of all existing religions. Both professors were very fond of me and interested in my welfare. Somehow, I was not fully convinced. I went to Dr. Chari and told him about my plight. He listened attentively and then asked me, "Do you want to get a doctorate in philosophy like all of us? What are you going to do after you obtain the doctorate? Become a professor of philosophy in some university and lecture on philosophy all your life? Look at us. We talk on philosophy every day. But what is our spiritual achievement? Nil." I was overwhelmed by the force of conviction and candor with which he drove home his point. He got up, came near me, and putting his hands on my shoulders, said in a melting voice, "Ganesan, do you want to live a true spiritual life like your granduncle, or give courses on the theories of philosophies all your life, like us professors? Go and live at the ashram. Practice your granduncle's supreme teaching of true spirituality, his teaching of who am I. Self-inquiry is the pinnacle of all philosophies, the highest truth. Live that teaching, Ganesan." To quote Swami Vivekananda, any philosophy, especially Advaita, as theory, will be a windmill around one's neck, whereas its practice is heaven on earth. I bless you. Dr. Chari was my first mentor, and his blessing enabled me to come back to the ashram in 1959 and stay put there. That guidance to stay at the ashram by Dr. Chari was the harbinger of a plethora of guidances that were shared by the old devotees of Sri Bhagavan. It was one old devotee or the other who guided me, literally took me to the sages and saints who in turn helped me gain spiritual maturity. In 1959 itself, the Pandit T.K. Sundaresa Iyer revealed the greatness of the Siddha Purusha, Yogi Ram Surat Kumar. And then in 1960 sent me to Swami Ram Das. Swami Ram Das guided me to Mataji Krishnabai. Munagala Venkataramaya, author of Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, made me experience the spiritual greatness of Mother Rama Devi. And the old devotee Balarama Red Iyer took me to Madras and made me receive the blessings of Ma Anandamayi. And Framji and Dorab took me to J. Krishnamurti, and later to Nisargadatta Maharaj. The guidance of the old devotees of Sri Bhagavan continued in my life. I learned that sadhana, guidance, grace, and spiritual progress are a continuum, similar to one getting onto a conveyor belt. The very momentum of one taking up the spiritual path and getting guidance from a sage will take the seeker smoothly and assuredly towards the destination of self-realization. You will be interested to know that as recently as 2016, Anuradha and I were taken by a devotee of Sri Bhagavan to a saint living at Velpur in Andhra Pradesh. He is addressed by all as Mouna Swami, since he is in total silence from 1985 onwards. He is a true follower of our beloved Bhagavan. He can safely be said that he lives in the principle and the practice of the instructions of Sri Bhagavan in almost every way. After reading my book, Ramana Periya Puranam, Velpur Mouna Swami instantly arranged for its translation into the local language, Telugu. Then he got several thousand copies of it printed and had them distributed to the aspirants who flocked to have his darshan. Coming across many references in that book to my having met many saints and the spiritual benefits I gained through these meetings, he requested me to write them all down in a book. He said that just as Ramana Periya Puranam had brought to light how the old devotees of Sri Bhagavan benefited from their close association with Sri Bhagavan, this second book, Meetings with Saints and Sages, this book would help spiritual aspirants to seek the company of sages and saints and thereby get benefited. While Bhagavan Ramana is the pole star, the Satguru guiding us all, the sages and saints are like the lighthouses, throwing light wherever and whenever the aspirant meet with dark patches of ignorance, doubts, and wrong knowledge during their spiritual sadhana. I did not feel inspired to write it in seclusion, and I kept procrastinating, postponing, until Anuradha reminded me how the founder of Aham, A. Ramana, and Elizabeth MacDonald wholeheartedly cooperated during the past by arranging 49 talks by me, each lasting an hour, and also put them up on the Aham website. You will be happy to know that already more than 300,000 downloads and counting of this compendium have happened. She said that we would request that the present director of Aham, Stanley Davis Jr., to arrange for these talks on meetings with saints and sages. He has extended a very hearty welcome for us both, and here we are with these. So I humbly request that you read this book, Meetings with Sages and Saints, with interest and attention, as it will benefit you tremendously in your spiritual sadhana.